Hey guys, welcome to our series on When Heaven Invades Earth. We're on part 3. My name is Billy. Thanks so much for checking out this video. What we talked about in part 1 and part 2, just in case you missed it or you watched it, so long ago that you can't remember, is positioning ourselves in such a way that we can host the presence of God. We're the temple of God, so it's not wrong to say host the presence of God. And the way to think about it, I believe is, of course, when we're saved, when we become Christians, we receive the Holy Spirit. There is that, the Bible even calls it, I believe, kind of like a token or a ticket, or, like the kids go into the Polar Express, right, to the North Pole, their ticket gets punched, right? So you've got salvation. But there were in the New Testament Christians who had not yet been baptized in the Holy Spirit, and there were people who were not walking in the power, and the presence is more accurate, the presence of God and the Holy Spirit, to the same degree, the same level as, for example, Peter and Paul were, right? It's not that Peter and Paul were better than you, okay? But it's that Peter and Paul were better positioned in their lives, in their obedience, and their trust, and their faith, and in just probably their calling. And we're all called to different things, but in their obedience and their trust and their faith, to host a greater presence of God that would impact people around them. Now, I've said things before that I end up not agreeing with in the future, but currently that is my take on that. I mean, you have met people in your life before, okay? Let's say you're a Christian. You've met people in your life before who walk around with what feels and seems to be a greater intimacy with God, a greater knowledge of God. And you would even say probably, even if you're not charismatic, you would say a greater presence of God. Does that make sense? Certainly living out Christ to others in a more powerful way, right? Wouldn't you say that there's people out there like that? So that's what we're talking about. That's what we talked about in the first 2. We're going to talk about today is one of my favorite subjects because we all have to go through it, and I've seemed to do a lot of it in my life, and that is waiting on God. So heaven invades earth when we wait on Him. I mean, waiting is part of that is the process, right? Now, part of the process, within the process, there's things that we want to do. We want to get in the right position, right? And we're going to go through tests and trials to be refined. There's things that are going to happen. But part of it is just very simply, very purely, just the time of waiting. Now, let me not only define it that way. In the time of waiting, we want to be in the right position. So the first 2 still apply. It's not just, well, I've been waiting and I'm sick and tired of waiting. Okay. Yeah, you are waiting because God's not giving it to you, but I don't know that He's ever going to. I don't know that heaven's ever going to invade earth in your life and through your life if you're not waiting with the right attitude, right? And you're not positioning yourself correctly, etc. Does that make sense? So we want to have the right attitude and position ourselves correctly as we wait. But we also got to know that the waiting is important. The waiting is going to happen because it happened for David. He waited 22 years. It happened for Joseph, for Moses. Paul, after his eyes were open, right? He waited a number of years before he really went into his full-time ministry. And then Jesus, how about Jesus? If we think about it, he waited 30 years. Why didn't he start his ministry at age 28 and then minister for 5 years? Or why didn't he start at 25 or 20 or whatever? And then why, and here's our verse for today, in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, does it say, Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and all the people. Jesus grew in wisdom. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus was the Son of God. I know that. I believe that, of course. But He grew in wisdom, right? So that means at age 25, He had more wisdom than He had at 20. At age 30, He had more wisdom than He had at 25. And He had more stature, as the interpretation my Bible has, and more favor with God and people. He grew, like it increased. Okay, so that means over that period of 30 years, up until he started his public ministry, he got baptized by John the Baptist. The Holy Spirit came down in the form of a dove. That presence covered him, right? The heaven invaded earth through him. Heaven began to invade earth through Jesus after a period of 30 years, right? It wasn't happening prior to that. Now, he was the Son of God prior to that. Don't get me wrong. We're talking about a soldier who is a soldier in the army and then gets sent out. So we're talking about heaven invading earth. We're saying the soldier gets sent out. We're saying that the presence of God comes down and goes out and impacts and infects and influences everything around you. So when you walk into that gym to work out, when you walk into that school, when you walk into that job, when you walk into your home, it's the presence of God, as we talked about in part 2, the presence of God, just like in Genesis 35, verses 4 and 5, goes out and impacts and effects the atmosphere, right? It impacts the atmosphere around you and the people around you. So a big part of that comes through this waiting, which Jesus did through 30 years. It's a really weird example, but it's really simple. But it makes me think about Facebook Messenger, the thumbs up that you can hold down and it grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you can have more impact and more effect with that big thumbs up if you will wait and hold it down long enough, right? So really simple example, but that's what God's doing. And so that's the last point I want to make. If you are waiting and you're waiting with the right heart before God and you're positioned correctly before God and your attitude and your thoughts and your words, you're not complaining, but you're saying, awesome, God, thank you for this time of waiting. Then what I also want to tell you is the longer you wait, I believe the greater the invasion, the greater the impact, right? The longer you wait, the greater the impact. I mean, Moses waited 40 years and then he delivered an entire nation, millions of people, right? David, the greatest king ever, waited 22 years. The longer you wait, just like that thumb growing, the greater the impact. And why is that? Give hope. I mean, it gives an incredible amount of hope. It should give you a lot of joy in your waiting, because I understand what it means to, I have a great desire to speak and to minister and to make an impact, to make a difference. Currently in my ministry, I don't know when you're watching this, but at least right now as I'm making this in January 2016, I don't have significant ministry. I get to speak, every couple of weeks at some different FCA events with 20 or 5 kids, 10 kids, 20 kids, 30 kids, 40 kids, depends on the meeting and the different school. And I'm so thankful for that. Such a blessing. I get to lead church sometimes with 200 people, 150 people, but I'm not speaking, just doing the MC. But look, there's a desire in me to speak to and to share my love for God and his love for me and that relationship we can have and that tangible touch and that heaven invading earth with tons and tons of people. But that's currently not what I'm doing, right? So what do I do? Do I complain about that? Do I worry about that? Do I throw my hands up in frustration about that? Or do I wait? And here's the joy I have. The longer I wait, I believe the longer that you wait, the longer God asks you to wait, I believe the longer he's holding down that thumbs up button. The greater the invasion will be when he finally releases you, right? When he finally releases his presence around you. So that was applying to me. Let's apply it to other people. Maybe you've got a son or a daughter who you've got a broken relationship with, or they don't have a relationship with God. You've got a good relationship with them, but they've gone away from God, whatever it is. You know what? The longer you wait, if you stay faithful in prayer, if you have the right attitude, if you're not complaining, but you're rejoicing and saying, God, I believe you're faithful and I trust you. We're waiting for my wife's mom to come to Christ. And, my wife's been waiting 25 years, been praying for 25 years, and we're not even close, that we can tell. But I believe the longer we wait, that when it does happen, the invasion is going to be powerful. The change and life change is going to be powerful. The story is going to be powerful. More lives are going to be impacted than they would if, after just 1 year of prayer, her mom had come to Christ. Do you understand what I'm saying? So there's hope in your waiting, because the longer you wait, the longer he's holding down that thumbs up button, the greater the invasion, the greater the impact. So waiting is very powerful. So stay faithful and even joyful in your hope as you wait. All right. Thank you, guys.